Hey guys, Ryan Gill here with Hunt Primitive. Today we're going to talk about napping your own deer hunting points. And if you're familiar with my channel at all, you know that I actually have several napping videos available. And the one in particular, if you're just starting out, is the FlintKnapping for Beginners video, which I will drop a link down to in the description. So you're probably going to be looking for some really detailed information if you're just getting started. So I'm going to point you to that video. But in this video, we're going to be talking about just kind of a little bit of rundown on some of the basics rather than napping through the entire point. I think we're going to highlight a couple key moments and then also make sure you do stick around to the end, because what I'm specifically covering in this video are some of the mistakes and things that you should watch out for when napping your own deer hunting points. Because despite all of the videos that I put out to help a lot of other people make their points, I continuously see these same mistakes happening over and over and over again, and so I really want to be able to highlight them for you in this video. Alright, we're going to go ahead and get a start here, and what we're doing is we're going to work with Keokuk rock today, and the reason is it's kind of an underrated rock, but it makes a heck of a good hunting point overall. Now I'm going to be using this small flake right here. A lot of folks just getting started, they're going to start off with something a little bit larger. It's going to give you the opportunity to kind of make a few mistakes along the way. But as you get pretty good at making them, I'm typically just going after these smaller flakes, so there's a lot less material to reduce overall. And of course we're going to be running copper tools today, and I know a lot of people love to see me run all just the antler tools. And again we have a ton of videos of only napping with antler or indigenous tools, and most of you are going to be going through this process using copper, and so that's why I'm teaching you with the copper. So if you want to see me nap with the antler start to finish, just look up Hunt Primitive, abo napping, Hunt Primitive, antler napping, whatever. You can browse through a lot of the videos. So what I'm kind of doing here is, if you've watched some of the other videos, we're setting up these platforms, and this is a great natural platform that we have right here, and it's got this ridge, and we need to take all of this off to basically thin this flake out before we're even ready to start making it look like a triangle shape. And so the abrader of course knocks off a lot of the light rock that prohibits us from driving a good flake. You've certainly learned about that. And then it's just a game about angles and driving flakes off kind of one at a time until we reduce it down to a shape that we can work either with indirect percussion or with pressure flaking, which you'll see in a little bit. But you see how I'm just kind of working down this ridge and removing these nice long flakes. In fact, that's a beautiful little tooling flake right there. Use a lot of these for stuff like little hand knives, working arrows and whatnot. So oftentimes I save some of those as I'm working. And I'm definitely looking forward to getting this point put together for you, because then I'm going to be able to really give you some solid dimensions and things to specifically watch out for. So I'm hoping that this is one of those videos that you'll come back to later on when you are making them and say, what were those dimensions again, or what were those points that he was so adamant about, and that it'll really keep you from losing a deer when you shoot at it. Because I've seen a lot of people shooting at deer, or they come back and send me messages and then say, you know, I made some arrows and I made some points and I bounced them right off of a deer, or I only got like 3 inches of penetration. And those are really common problems that we're working hard to get folks to overcome. So just clean this up just a little bit more. But you see how we're just thinning that right out, and it's got a little concavity to it right here, and so I keep having to kind of come from both angles to get rid of that, because it just keeps kind of making it a little bit worse. But that's fine, I'll be able to work through that, no problem. So I'm coming in from this side now to catch it up. See, I kind of got rid of it there. Alright, so it's looking pretty good. We'll swap over, I think, to a little smaller billet, just for a few more, little more precise hits. And we can typically turn these points out pretty quick, but also remember I go through quite literally hundreds of points every year. I think maybe even last year we were up close to about 1,000 points that I did last year for other people to hunt with and whatnot. And so if you are new to the channel, also you may have the questions of, can you buy points from me? The answer is yes. They're at huntprimitive.com. So as I said, we specialize in making hunting points for folks, as well as about anything else that you would need. But you can also get the napping tools and napping rock that we use at huntprimitive.com as well. So really about anything that you would need to get up and running, we've got it for you. And if you find it somewhere else that you like better or cheaper or whatever, that's perfectly fine too. Just as long as you're getting out and you're napping and you're having a good time, that's what's really important to me. Alright, so you can see obviously we're starting to develop the idea that this is probably going to be the point. This will be the base, and now we can almost, instead of having to worry about thinning it so hard, we'll kind of do this battering hit to reduce the width quite a bit. No sense putting a ton of time in trying to thin it while it's still just way, way, way too wide. It's good practice if you're getting started, but we don't necessarily need the practice right now. We need to knock a point out. There we go. But yeah, this rock, this is heat treated Kia Cook, as I mentioned, and I believe it's on the outer edge of the Burlington formation, very similar to Burlington shirt. And I heat it depending kind of on the rock, usually between 600 and 625 degrees. If it's a little grainier, I'll even run up to 650. But heat treating, for those that don't know, makes the rock a lot slicker. So it's usually a little bit more white colored as opposed to the cream, and it's going to be a little rougher looking. Like this is the outside of it when you break it, so it'll be a little bit rougher looking. This probably isn't a great example, but then heat treating, when you hit it, it slickens it up, so it just makes it a lot more glass-like, which makes it not only nap easier, but then it also creates a sharper edge. So not all rocks need heat treating, and not all rocks will take heat treating, but this is one that does benefit greatly from a heat treating, and it could be done under the fire primitively, or you can do it in a kiln. And of course, professionally, we do it in a kiln because we have to do quite a large volume of rock for folks, and you can only do so much under the ground. Plus, then there's a trial and error period. But I do also have a video. If you look up Hunt Primitive Heat Treating Napping Rocks, I've got an old video. The information's still very good, but it's an old video, and I kind of sound like a goof narrating it. But it'll teach you how to heat treat under the ground with a fire. So, alright, now we're closing in, and now I'm going to have to start paying a little bit closer attention because we're obviously starting to get a little closer to our desired shape. Alright, so this is about the point now that I'm going to switch over to using a copper flaker, and we're going to almost just, I'm not trying to reduce the size, and I'm not even trying to thin it as much. What I'm doing is I'm cleaning up the edge, and I'm raising a platform over to one side so I can drive my final thinning flakes. So I kind of get it down to a stage about like this onto a preform, and then it's thicker than obviously we want to be able to hunt with, but that's about the thickness, and I would say you're looking at probably a 1/4 inch thick, give or take. And so now I'm just removing flakes to raise the center line, as I discussed in the beginner's video quite a bit. moving the center line over, so this will be my new platform to run those bigger thinning flakes. So I just set those up by hand by pressure flaking. And I'm going to swap over and do the other side for this one because it's got a higher spot I need to get rid of. So I kind of strategically set up these platforms. Alright, so now we're going to switch over to some indirect percussion to thin out those platforms we just set up. And I usually start at either the tip or the back. I usually don't start right in the middle unless I have a particular spot that really needs reduced. And it's going to be really important to stop and kind of abrade fairly often and then study the piece. And I'm going to reset that platform just a little bit. There we go. Very nice. Love indirect percussion once you kind of get the hang of it, which I think is pretty easy, especially with these indirect percussion sticks, the copper one. If you got big work to do, you use this side of it, but we're not doing any real big work on this piece. It's just small work, and so you don't want to do these big giant hits with this end because then you'll start to bend it. But you don't really need to hit it any harder than what you see me hitting it here. If you're wailing on it, you should be using the other side. Just as kind of a little hint. A lot of it's just these little wrist taps. So if I'm picking up my elbow, then it's too hard. It's just a wrist pop. Okay, that's pretty darn nice. Alright, let's see what got there. See how we're thinning it out. Still not perfectly thin, but that's okay because now we're going to raise the platform the other way and remove some flakes off of this side right here. And by doing that, when I lay it down, I'm going to lay it down like this, and I'm going to remove flakes off this side, which will raise that center line so I can use indirect and drive those flakes. Alright, pretty darn close now, as you can see. So we're going to just do our final thinning with pressure, really cleaning up the edge. And I will drive some pretty decent flakes to help finish thinning, but we're not far off of our finished thickness anyway. So it's just a little bit of working up and down the edge, taking little high spots, little platforms we've made, and then I typically look at about every one and say, does it just need a little bit of removal? And then when you get to a spot that maybe we need a little bit more thinning, then I abrade it like that, and then I line up, and then I pop a better flake. And so just about every one, it's not like I'm just going up and down it. I'm strategically looking at the flake that I need to remove and say, does it need just a little cleanup, nothing at all, or does it need a pretty substantial one? We got the whole preform worked out there pretty quick. Now this is really as thick as I would go. This is about 3/16. This is a little thicker than I typically get them, but well within the threshold of what I'm looking for. 3/16, kind of at the max. And then you're looking at back here about 1 inch wide. 7/8 legal in most places. We'll talk here at the end about why bigger is not better when it comes to stone points, but we're going to switch over to a micro flaker, and this is thin enough that notching it with this shouldn't be a problem for me. If you're just getting started, then and you're not getting stuff quite as thin, then you're probably going to use one of these notching flakers. So it gives you a little bit more support and better bite with the copper. I typically don't need that as much on my hunting points. I can usually get away with the little micro flaker. And so we're going to do like a little side notch on this one. And so I usually just kind of nibble that out. And what I'm typically, I have another whole video just on notching and sharpening. So if you look up, hunt primitive, FlintKnapping, notching, sharpening, stuff like that, you'll find a whole bunch of different individual tutorials that'll help you out. but I just kind of nibble that out a little piece at a time. I'm not trying to get too much at once, because that's usually when it stalls out on you. There's a nice little flake there. It's like once in a while, once you kind of set up a nice platform, you can really drive a good one, and it'll take one of those C-shaped flakes out, which is nice. All right, we got it notched out and cleaned up, so it's ready to sharpen up. And so when you're sharpening, again, you're going to use the micro flaker or a very fine tip deer antler. And if you listen to my sharpening video, we talk about listening for those 1 clicks, and that's removing individual flakes, because sharpening a stone point isn't about grinding it into shape. A stone point won't be sharp unless it's got a clean break on the flake, and so you can listen for that by those individual clicks. If you get like click click, that's still kind of fine too. But if you're trying to sharpen the edge and it's going then you're just dulling the edge up. And so make sure that when you sharpen, you're getting that crisp flake removal sound. And then I'll go up and down the point. I'll strategically also look for if there's a high spot that maybe needs to come out. I'll use my sharpening to kind of clean the edge up, but I go up one side and then basically down the other. And then my serrations are typically about the width apart that my flaker is. So of course, if you're using a piece of antler and it's just a little bit thicker, your serrations are just going to be a little bit further apart. And then this way, because what you're doing is instead of coming back on top of the serration that you made, basically like the little serration platform, you're not going to remove that. You're actually going to go in between. So you're removing a flake off both sides, and you're developing those what I call needle sharp tips that are on the ends, and then they're like razor sharp dips. And so once you kind of master the sharpening process, you'll have really clean cuts, and those tops will be really, really sharp, but then the leading edge of those little serrations are really, really razor sharp as well. So it does take a little bit of practice, and there's, again, that video I have on sharpening scary sharp stone points that will break that process down for you even more, and how I kind of twist and curl a little bit. That's exaggerated, obviously, but as I am removing these flakes, depending on the direction I'm going and if there's any sort of issues, I kind of put a little bit of, I'm not just going straight down and crushing, I'm kind of putting torque to, from, or curling back, especially if I'm coming from the other direction. And when I'm going this direction, I'm actually usually pushing just slightly back towards the point, because it's going to create that sharp edge on the leading edge of the serration. And then when I'm coming from this side, I'm grabbing and I'm typically hooking back to, I don't know if you can see those slight differences that I make, and the reason is because, again, I'm trying to create that clean break on the leading edge. So having the serration sharp going this way doesn't really do me a whole lot of good. I want the serration sharp going this way, so when I'm cutting, it's grabbing, and all those, the leading edges of each one of those serrations, those are what I'm really looking to be sharp. And so that's kind of my technique on sharpening. Check that video out. And then the edge, or the tip, I clean that up ever so slightly, and sometimes it's good as is, and then other times I'll take the abrader, and I'm not worried about dulling the very tip, like the sides of the tip. That doesn't bother me. I actually want those a little bit more robust, but I need that tip to be really needle sharp, as you can see right there. It should be sharp enough to where if you push it like that, you can absolutely feel that it's sharp. And so we're pretty sharpened up right there, and I always kind of test on the back of my hand. If it grabs that skin and makes little micro cuts, then that's pretty darn sharp. And then I'll feel up and down the point also, and feel for any spots that I don't think are super sharp, and then I'll go back and adjust those. I just want to make sure that all those serrations are pretty darn sharp, which these ones are. I might need one more right there. Now this is going to be a really important part coming up, and that is when you're looking at where your notches are, say on a side notch point, it's really important that this is not sticking up in front of this, because remember, as this is penetrating through an animal, you don't want this to be a point of contact. So if you can kind of close your eyes and rub your finger across here, and if you can feel this back edge like it steps up, that's a spot that it could hang up and slow down penetration. So you'll notice that being pretty much flat across it is fine. And then also if your notches are too big, which the notches on this one they're a little bit on the larger side. That's again about as large as I would go on them. And but if you have much larger notches, like you've really blown them out, then that could be an issue where it's all happening quite quickly as this thing slams through the side of a deer. But you don't want to have any places that hide is going to catch on there. So if you kind of close your eyes, run your fingers over it very gently, and if it doesn't hang up, then you know that you're pretty well good to go. And then also, really important, this is another thing that I see people make a mistake on all the time, is your tip geometry. It needs to come to a needle sharp tip. And notice that this is pretty darn flat on either side. It's okay if it's a little bit concave or a little convex like this one is, but these should be very triangle shaped, okay? If it's rounded, and I see people do this all the time, they come in and they round the front off. If it's rounded in here, it's gonna really slow down your penetration a lot. We did a tremendous amount of work on that in my book, The Secrets and Science of Primitive Archery, where we did friction tests to see how hard it is to penetrate with something like this versus something that's even a little bit rounded, and takes almost double the energy to penetrate with one that is rounded. But I see people doing that all the time. Get rid of all of that rounding. Have these edges very, very straight. Okay, then it's going to be really important that you get the appropriate size. This is as large of a point as you should be shooting at a deer realistically. Bigger is not better when it comes to hunting. This is on the large side for a contextual stone point. Most of the ones that we've killed deer with stuff down to this size right here, 12 grains, really, really small stuff. For legal reasons, you got to be out to about 7/8 of an inch. This one's, I would say, right at an inch, I bet, maybe 15/16 wide, okay? And this is fine, but once you start getting into these larger sizes, say bumping up to like 125 grains, 150 grains, it becomes very hard to penetrate. So I put this one on a grain scale and it's right at 75 grains. So if you follow along with the book that I wrote, you'll notice that big differences in penetration between the small points and the big points. And the reason is, remember, stone is a lot less dense than steel. And so if you're going to get that same heavy weight that you would want out of a steel point, your stone point's going to end up being way too big, and it's just not going to penetrate efficiently. And that's why, historically speaking, most of the points are actually quite small. And I see that again, time and time again, people wanting to make stone points that match the sizes and the weights of steel points, and they think, well, if I'm going to hunt, say, like a bigger animal, like I'm going to go elk hunting, that I need a 200 grain stone point. And what you're doing is you're actually hurting your penetration. You probably won't penetrate at all. So I am fully aware that kinetic energy and momentum kills, but that's with steel points that are much more dense and have much less friction. And so when you start shooting something that has a lot more friction, the benefits that you're going to get from a higher kinetic energy and momentum are completely negated by the significant increased kinetic friction of a stone point, that especially have to have some level of serrations to be sharp and cause hemorrhage within the body cavity of the animal. And so because of that, I'm telling you, I promise you 100%, shoot the smaller points and you'll get the better penetration. And a 7/8 to 1 inch wide point has no problem killing a deer at all, and no problem killing stuff up to bison. I've shot bison with these before, and I've taken over 60 big game animals with primitive hunting implements. So this isn't theory, this is tried and true, and I see people make that mistake all the time, and I don't want to see you make that mistake. So keep your sizes down. Really, the heaviest points that you should even be considering shooting are 80-90 grains at the top end. Sweet spot, probably 60 to 70 grains, 75 grains. This is, again, about the largest stone point that you need to shoot. Okay? And very sharp tip geometry, no rounding in the front, about 7/8 to an inch wide, and then no rounding, and then all of those little scary sharp serrations, and you will have yourself a really nice stone hunting point. And then just a couple final closing thoughts for some frequently asked questions. If you're not used to watching my channel, if you are used to watching it, you see that we use these stone points all the time, and we bring down a lot of animals with them. And so we get questions like, you know, does the animal die a slow, painful death? Do you have to chase them for days when you're hunting with stone points? Absolutely not. You put this through the heart, lungs, any of the vital organs, and it's going to kill it just as fast as steel points do. They're going to run 50 to 60 yards, fall over dead, and be done. It's very, very quick. They're very efficient. And people will argue that, and then they'll say, well, they're just not as good as steel points. Well, they're not as efficient as steel points because, again, you can't use the extra weight. And also, there's a lot less friction on the steel point. So you typically are going to get better penetration, and you can just resharpen them by honing them, where these you have to chip a whole new edge, and these are going to have more of a propensity to break because they're stone points. But if you're interested in primitive hunting, you accept all of those things. But as far as the true efficacy of stone hunting points, they're very, very efficient killing points, and I have no problem going out and hunting everything from bunnies to bison with these stone points, and it kills them very, very quickly and very efficiently. So if you happen to have any other questions that you would like answered, you can either drop them down in the comments, and hopefully I can answer some of those questions. It's hard to get to everybody, but we'll give it our best go. And then also, you can get here on YouTube, you can search up in the search bar, type hunt primitive, and then your question. It could be hunt primitive, how to sharpen a stone point, hunt primitive, deer hunting with stone points. Any of that stuff, you're going to see our content show up, and there's a lot of instructional information out there, and then there's also a lot of entertaining hunts as well. So hopefully we catch you on some of those other adventures.